again. It's things that we've learned, and it's not freedom. It's very limited and it's distorted. To me, metta, that's one of the powers of metta, is that it unifies. It doesn't abandon awareness. It's not telling ourselves a story, but we can begin to see that all humans are connected. It's not that we're not positioned in different places, or the situation or conditions that we live in are different, of course. They are fundamentally often, but there is a connection there. It's important to recognize that. And a lot of our thoughts are separating. Creates a lot of separation for us. So the investigation that we're talking about really counters that. It bumps up against that for sure. And that's why it's a practice. And that's why, it's a path, it's a journey. It's not over in one day or 1 year or 2 years or 3 years. It's really a lifetime of discovery and exploration and investigation. And what we're developing is this capacity to take a sustained and fresh look at what's happening. Fresh look, like, so, meet your body, wake up in the morning and just meet this new day, check in with your bodies, be present. So often, even in ordinary experiences, sometimes I'll notice something that I didn't notice before. It could be a particular taste or a smell or a color, or a texture, a shape, an energy, or a temperature, something. When we're present, we're receiving, life as it's happening, rather than, preoccupied, in our world of self-thought, more open. It's free of preconceptions and judgments, and that's the power of mindfulness. So when we talk about investigation, a lot of what we're talking about too is, of course, developing the resources to investigate. And one of the resources clearly is mindfulness. And by practicing it, as regularly as you can, the mindfulness becomes something that, just like we know how to think, the mindfulness becomes like something that it begins to come into our life. And, we just not always just thinking about things, but we're actually receiving the moment, kind of dropping into that moment of time. So we might be thinking a lot, and then if we've been practicing, you notice the smell, or you're just present with that person, or, you drop the preoccupation for a few moments and you receive something new. Sometimes it's a gift. Sometimes it's a recognition that we're in pain. Could be anything. But we're getting in touch with what's happening through this investigative process. And the quality of investigation, it's even free of the agenda of fixing, which is difficult. For instance, if we are aware of fear or anxiety happening, as I mentioned, say more about this, the nature, the characteristic of it. If we're looking at it, we can see that it's painful. And when we get caught in it, creates some tension for us. But, if we're an investigative process, we begin to train our mind to let go of the agenda of having to get rid of that feeling, to not create an enemy of it, but to begin to take a look at it. I remember one time I was taking a class with, it was just a group dropping kind of thing. And I was with Joseph Goldstein, who was a friend of mine now and was my early teacher. And he's got a lot of wisdom. He's a real, he's been, just very dedicated meditator. Some of you may know him or have heard his talks. But I remember in the discussion, he said that when he's sitting or when he's paying attention, if he encounters that kind of inner conflict or tension or whatever it might be going on, for him, he actually perceives, now this is, he's been practicing a long time, but he perceives that as good news. Because he knows that that's what he's carrying around. And so he doesn't necessarily want to be carrying this around. So it gives him a chance to investigate it. to take a look at it and to begin to see if he can bring a deeper level of understanding about that experience that he's encountering, that little storm that's happening or whatever it is. But let's face it, the reality is you need a lot of equanimity to have really genuinely have that attitude. And he does have a lot of equanimity. But it kind of shows you a little bit about the spirit of investigation, which is we want to, when we encounter our suffering, we want to be able to explore it and learn something about it so that we don't reinforce it. But in order to do that, we have to have the resources to do that. We can't just tell ourselves, oh, whatever, it's okay. That's there and I've got it, or whatever that is. We don't want to tell ourselves a story about it. We want to begin to explore and see what we can discover in that. So that's investigation. And that's so much of what the meditation practice is about. So that quality of mindfulness allows us to begin to meet things in a fresh way. And also that whole investigative practice around making room. Because honestly, if we can develop an ability more as time goes on with that practice, and we can begin to give the experiences, painful experiences or anxiety, fear, a little bit of room, or we're a little bit more allowing of having that experience. We're learning to be with it a little bit more without getting overwhelmed or caught by it. We're gaining a little bit more confidence with the mindfulness practice that we can be with something that maybe before we had to move away from really quickly, but we begin to learn that we don't have to move so quickly away. We can actually be with it, and that gives us a chance. So that can I make room paves the way for this investigation, because if we begin to make room for the experience, a little bit more of an allowing, compassionate attitude around when we encounter pain, it allows us to begin to bring the healing quality of mindfulness and awareness into that pain, and that can free that energy up. So making room is really an attitude that is what facilitates investigation. It's great to have a mindfulness practice, but you can support mindfulness and bring a lot more ease if you also, when you encounter the resistance or the turbulence or the pain or the contraction, you ask yourself, can I make room? And maybe there's a lot of resistance, so can I make room for the resistance? And then you're just asking that question and maybe cracking that door open that allows you to actually have that experience without then having it trigger a whole bunch of other stuff, other stories and reactions and suffering. So investigation, we're learning to pay attention more in a sustained way. There are more moments of mindfulness. As mindfulness gets stronger, we could string those moments of mindfulness together. And that's really helpful, because then we don't just get that recognition, acknowledgement piece that I was talking about. That's the impact of that. The recognizing might be one moment of something arising and then it's going on, but the acknowledgement piece gives us a chance to kind of make room and look at it in a little bit more of a sustained way. And then there's a lot of insight and learning can happen out of that, even if it's just a few moments of sustained attention. So if we're feeling anxiety, if we recognize that we're experiencing it and just see if we can make a little room for it, then we can begin to see its characteristics. And then another sort of what I would call a little bit more advanced, or where this practice goes, and I've already mentioned this, but I'll go into it more, which is that ability to not only recognize that you're in anxiety, or that you're in fear, but you're also aware of how you're holding it and your relationship to it. And see, that's what happens when the attention gets a little more sustained. When we're making room for it, we then begin to see, oh, there's resistance to that. There's a self-judging, or maybe it's triggering shame or anger about that experience. And so that gives us a chance to then look at that and take a look at it and see if we can relate to that resistance, or whatever it might be, however which way maybe it might be a feeling of resignation or something that comes up around that, or despair. And then the mindfulness, it gives us a chance to reveal that we're holding that. And by shining the light on that, what it does is it begins to untangle that conditioning. It's not reinforcing it anymore because we're bringing the light of awareness to that particular relationship and that reaction. And so that's the untangling of the knot. That's the beginning to free ourselves of that habit that we've picked up along the way. That when anxiety comes up, this is how we need to hold that. Maybe it's too threatening, and so we're afraid of it. And if we can just acknowledge and recognize that we're afraid of it and that we don't like it or that we hate ourselves for it, then we can shine the light of non-judgmental attention on that particular relationship. And that relationship, believe it or not, that relationship begins to change through mindfulness practice. Because one of the functions of mindfulness, one of the benefits of mindfulness, is that it deconditions the mind. Literally, there's lots of studies about how the brain gets changed through mindfulness. This is where it's beginning to change, is because we're not getting caught in that circuit, that reaction, that deep habit of holding ourselves or things that we encounter about ourselves in the same way. And so it slowly erodes. It's really a process of erosion. It begins to take the power out of that particular reaction to anxiety or fear. And that extends to other areas in our life too, for sure. So when we talk about wise effort in practice, remember I said it's gentle perseverance. It's another way the Buddha described it is what we're doing is we're cultivating skillful means, skillful qualities of heart and mind, and abandoning or letting go or healing unskillful ways of relating. And what the Buddha meant by skillful and unskillful is skillful is what leads to freedom. Unskillful is what reinforces and generates suffering. And so in this investigative process where we're untying the knots, so we're beginning to recognize the unskillful, but we're also, that process is facilitated, and we're also discovering a more skillful way to relate to the things that we do encounter, like fear and like anxiety. So there's kind of three kind of categories that I've kind of talk about, straight out of teachings, Buddhist teachings, but there's three kind of categories, ways of that we relate in unskillful ways to, let's just say specifically, because we're talking about working with fear, and the three categories are delusion, and I'll say more about that. Delusion is the first unskillful way that we hold or relate to anxiety and fear. The second is aversion, aversion, A-V-E-R-S-I-O-N, aversion. And the third is identification. Okay. So let me describe what I mean by delusion, some of the expressions of it. There are many, but these are a few that came to my mind today when I was working on this. Delusion is when we're unconscious. We all know that. When we're unconscious, we're disconnected. We're just not, we're not present. We're just automatic pilot, playing out habits. We all are subject to this. We're not all conscious all the time. And there's a great deal of unconsciousness going on, whether we recognize it or not. That's why it's called the unconscious. So there's unconscious, and there's a sense of delusion, disconnect. We're not connected to the present moment. A lot of that is because we're caught in habitual thinking. There can be a lot of confusion. We're suffering, but we can't figure it out. We can't see it, can't hold it. There's just a lot of confusion in the mind. It can form in ambivalence. It generates a lot of anxiety. When we feel confused about things, we're trying to make a decision. There's all this confusion going on, and we're trying to this and that, all these strategies and reading books and all that. So confusion can be a form of delusion. And another form of delusion. In terms of working on that particular expression of delusion, of course, we're working with that. And the way we work with that is we become more conscious beings. And the way we become more conscious beings is that we start being mindful of what we're doing from one moment to the next. And we start waking up. It's a path of awakening. So mindfulness facilitates that waking up, and so much of practice is simply that. It's waking up. It's not manufacturing. It's not like you're becoming, it's like not like just this path, like a PhD or, a job promotion or something like that. It's not really, it's not like that. It's more about, you just keep waking up, you keep waking up to what you're doing, and you keep waking up to what's causing you suffering and what leads to freedom. So it's that, that deepening process of awakening comes through investigation, through examination. It all makes sense to me. The Dharma always has made sense, that it's about taking a look in a fresh way so that you learn, and so that you can learn how to do things differently and hold things differently and make your way out of this tangle of a conditioned mess that we can find ourselves in sometimes, and find our way towards freedom. And it's really through our own effort that it happens, which is what I also appreciate about it. Not looking for someone's grace. So the shift from being unconscious or disconnect or confused, Dharma practice, investigation leads us to being more conscious, more discerning, because we're more and more in touch with the present moment. We're more balanced, so that when we need to make decisions or we take actions, there's more wisdom behind it, because we know what we're doing. Even if you do something unskillful, the Buddha said, even if you do something unskillful, it's better to know that you're doing something unskillful than not knowing that you're doing something unskillful. And I remember the first time I heard that, I said, God, that doesn't sound right. Like, if you know you're doing something unskillful, and that's better than not knowing you're doing something unskillful. But no, it's better to know, because then you can change it. If you don't know it, you're going to keep doing it. And we all know that. We all know that, when we play out our habits, we can get ourselves into trouble. And a lot of it is not because we have bad intentions. It's just that we're unconscious. We don't necessarily see in the moment what might be the wise or most compassionate response to have. So discernment. Again, the tremendous gift that mindfulness gives us in terms of shifting out of delusion is this sense of connection. Connection with your life, connection with your body, connection with the things that you're doing in your life, connection with others, because there's less of this whole concept of self and other, and it's very solid. So you feel, like, oh, that person's that way, I'm this way. There's that big separation there. So it creates that sense of connection. And also, instead of being disconnected, what happens with practice, sometimes you wish maybe it didn't, but you get in touch with things. You get to see yourself, and you get in touch with some of the things that you don't like, but you're touching them, you're connecting, and that's the way, that's the path. You need a lot of humility. It's not like when we start waking up, it's like we're really happy about what we're waking up to. Sometimes we're waking up to things that we don't like, about ourselves, or habits of mind that we wish we didn't have, like fear and anxiety. But it's better to wake up to it, because then then we can introduce this investigation and take a more creative approach, so that it changes, which is important. It's important to be able to taste a little bit of change and transformation. It takes patience and perseverance in the right approach. But where faith comes as we begin to see that the path does lead to some freedom. And then that develops confidence. And out of that confidence comes more equanimity, more, more energy, and more interest. Another form of delusion is telling ourselves a story. I've mentioned this before. One of the stories we tell ourselves about things like anxiety and fear is that it's always going to be this way. Sometimes our habits are so predominant, and we've been carrying them for so long. We'll tell ourselves the story about it's always going to be this way. And it's very important to realize that that's telling ourselves a story. And it's not helpful. So, a lot of the stories are based on speculative thinking, catastrophizing, speculative thinking, and all of that. And the counter to that, where practice transforms that delusion or that confusion in the mind, is learning to be with things as they are. I mean, think about that. That's a profound path, from what I can see. It's being able to develop that ability to be with yourself and to be with things as they are. It's a power that we have, and but we need to develop the resources to do that. Because sometimes being with yourself is painful. So we need to cultivate more compassion, for instance, or learn to make room for ourselves as it's whatever's arising is arising. And then that again is a real sense of refuge, or a power that we have within ourselves that we discover through that capacity. It becomes a place that we can rest in and have confidence that we can respond to the changing conditions in our life. And think about that confidence that you can meet things, that can grow through practice and investigation. It's very, it's infinitely useful. Finally, another form of delusion is our attachment to views and opinions. I have views and I have opinions, and some of those views and opinions are strong. Okay. And I think my views are right. And I think my opinions are mostly right. Our attachment to our views and opinions are what gets us into trouble. Because I also, hopefully, many times I get caught in this, but it's very important to realize that your views and opinions are views and opinions. It's actually that simple. It doesn't devalue your views. It doesn't devalue your opinions. You're not telling yourself it's not, you're not telling yourself a story about that. You're just realizing that it's a view or an opinion. That's it. View or opinion. It's not necessarily the absolute truth. And I think it's just important to recognize that, that things are sometimes more complex or nuanced, or there are things that we don't see. I mean, so many times I've had a view about someone, and it might be a view that developed from a distance. And then I've gotten to know that person, or I just had a conversation with that person, and that bubble just gets popped. And I realized I was carrying around a view of that person, that was so distorted. And it was not based on reality. It was based on something I conjured up in my mind based on certain impressions that I was getting. So just helpful to begin to see through that and recognize anyways that, we want to always hold our views and opinions that, that it's a viewer opinion, and it needs to be examined and tested out, and looked at and examined, not to just take it as the truth. So that's delusion. Second one is aversion, which is, again, major reaction or response or holding of pain in general. And as we said, that when we talk about investigating fear, we're looking at the signals, how it is expressing itself, its characteristics. That's a part of the investigative process, but we're also looking at the aversion or the resistance. And by being mindful of the resistance, we're not feeding it. So there's different forms of aversion. Resistance, there's contracting and shutting down. There's a sense of disconnecting. We disconnect out of aversion. We do that in different ways. We can suppress. We can avoid, push those experiences away. And we can also judge it, both self-judge ourselves, but judge, a lot of shoulds and shouldn'ts come into play. So the antidote is, of course, we'll go back to being mindful, which is open-hearted attention, which is not resistance. Mindfulness is not a moment of resistance in mindfulness. That's not its characteristics. Mindfulness can let us know that there's resistance arising, and it does, but the quality of mindfulness is not it's not thought, it's not resistance, it's open-hearted. So it has no agenda. It's not telling us that we should have fear or shouldn't have fear. It's literally just letting us know the experience itself, that moment. A resistance might arise once we become aware of it, but that's our thinking. And that's a little bit of what I'm talking about with the limitations of thinking, is a lot of our thinking is based on resistance. And that's really helpful to begin to understand that and to understand all the nuances and expressions of resistance. I've looked a lot at that myself, just how that plays out in my life, because I know, these experiences can be painful, and I know the mind doesn't like it and doesn't want it. And so how does that express itself in your daily life? It's very helpful to begin to examine that and recognize how this resistance plays itself out. And believe me, it's quite nuanced. It could be quite dramatic, like running away, and it can be more nuanced, like procrastinating. And I've certainly been guilty of procrastination for sure. So again, mindfulness is one form, and different ways of working creatively, skillfully with resistance. And this is, maybe this to me is like, I won't say like let's just say I think this is a really significant lesson, or something we want to take a look at that I think is really important, because so much of our suffering revolves around working with resistance to painful experiences. And it's quite, it's the brain has been deeply conditioned to resist pain. And some of us might think that's a natural response, but there's another response to pain, which is compassion and not resistance. But compassion needs to be cultivated and developed. So once we recognize that we're in pain, and one of the ways to recognize it is we can feel, oftentimes when there's resistance, there's a lot of agitation in the mind. The body and the mind can get hot. There just can be a lot of resistance and discomfort in the body, in the mind. So what can be very helpful in working with agitation in general, it could be just simple restlessness or boredom, but it also can be the agitation of anxiety or worry, is working with the anchor. As I mentioned, we're talking about moving from unskillful to skillful. It's one of the most skillful things you can do, is when you notice that you're feeling really agitated, to see if you can make your way back to the present. Feel a couple of breaths, feel the bottoms of your feet if you're walking or standing, feel sitting bones, just come back to the breath, come back to the body, work with that first foundation of mindfulness, just settle in a little bit, reconnect to the present moment. And, with practice, honestly, that really can be just such a helpful thing to do in working with that mode of suffering. So mindfulness of the anchor, the metta practice, again, another skillful way. These pave the way to compassion and understanding. They allow us to examine and look and take a look and discover, because we're paving the way to do that. Metta clearly does that. It's cultivating a friendliness, a more open-heartedness, a sense of wishing goodwill, a sense of inner strength that we have, that helps counter, it becomes an antidote to that agitation. And so I would really strongly suggest, if you have a lot of anxiety or fear, to look at taking up a bit of a metta practice. If you don't want to, that's fine. Like I said, I spent many years not doing it, but I just want to say that can be a real resource, a very helpful resource. You don't have to do it for half an hour. You can do it for a few minutes or any time. If you notice you're agitated, just find a couple of phrases that you resonate with and just do it right in the spot, even a couple times. That's what I do sometimes. Walking down the street, I'm getting all anxious. I'll just say, may I be safe and protected. May I be peaceful. Just to nurture something, to expand the mind. Metta. Making room, again, is the opposite. It's the antidote to resistance, because resistance is closing things down. It's shutting things off. It's not wanting to see. It's not wanting to be with. It doesn't like what's happening. And so asking, can I make room, is cracking that door open. Another practice around attitude and developing more compassion rather than aversion. This is a good practice, which is, can I hold this pain with compassion? One way is, can I make room? But another way is to, when you find that you're in emotional pain, for instance, or even physical pain. I've done it both ways. Can I hold this pain with compassion? And again, you're just asking that question. So it's an examination. It's an investigation. It's seeing if it's possible to just hold. I often think when others are in emotional pain, it's so much easier for us to feel compassion toward them. And for us, sometimes it's harder to get there. So that would be a good thing to practice is, can I hold this pain with compassion? And I had a lot of work to do around this. And I've taken that practice up, and it really could soften. And it's just a whole nother way of holding the pain, relating to it. And the third, so that's working with resistance, which as I said, is really a significant aspect of moving towards freedom. And like I said, the anxiety and fears can arise, but if we start freeing ourselves of the resistance and how we relate to it and the judgments and all that, it just passes. It arises and passes. It doesn't stick around as long. It doesn't have the kind of power or hold that it has on us. So that's why it's so helpful to get to know resistance and to try to get to know it in a more friendly way, not to add another judgment about it. The third is identification. That's another way of generating suffering. And this is a deep one. Buddha spent quite a bit of time talking about this and taking it apart, untangling it, revealing nature, of who we are, what the self is. And the way we identify with things, and this causes a lot of problems around emotions, is that we claim them as me or mine. We take them as who we are. And that causes a lot of problems. In one way, we can see how we claim it as me and mine is, it makes it very difficult to explore something. You shut it off. If you claim it as me or mine, then you're setting up a wall. You're setting up a preconception about who you are. And then taking a look in a fresh way becomes much more difficult. So we want to work with the way we claim things as me or mine. And different expressions of that is self-judgment. In other words, we might be in pain, but the self-judgment piece of it is we're claiming it as me or mine. So that pain is saying something about who we are. So oftentimes we define ourselves by these energies that we experience. And you can see that with self-judgment. It's kind of the combination. It's kind of a double whammy. That's why it's so powerful. It's both an identification with the experience, but also the aversion, kind of all rolled into one. So so oftentimes we have to look out for that trap by saying kind of like, I am, we often do it unconsciously. We don't necessarily say it out loud, but we might say, I am an anxious person. I'd say, if you can, leave off the I am. You could say, oh yeah, there's a lot of anxiety that I experience as I go through the day and all of that. No problem with that. That may be true. But just lighten up a little bit around the claiming. It's not, when we go through that list of anxiety and fears I did earlier, I hope that you probably recognized a few of them. They're not just my problems, I don't think, my issues or my things that I encounter. So that claiming as me or mine is a form of delusion. It's because when we take a look with this capacity to take a look, through mindfulness, making room, in a sustained way, what we can begin to see, and this is something I learned, is you can see that it's a form of energy that's arising. That's one characteristic, one level of understanding or experiencing these emotions is on the energy level. And one way to do that, a practice that I was taught when I was in Thailand with that group of monks and meditators, was, to see if I could observe it in the body. And that was one of their big emphases to me, was when I was experiencing any reactions of anxiety, which I was going through quite a bit when I was out there. They said, just watch the body, watch the body, watch the body. So I said, okay, I'll watch the body, watch the body, watch the body, be in my body, be in my body, I didn't want to be in my body, but be in my body, be in my body. I kept, every time I have a strong anxiety state or fear or reaction of what was going on, the rustling, all the other stuff that was going on at night, I would just try to observe it on a physical level. And, what I saw was, it's like the 4th of July in there when you pay attention. I mean, it's like fireworks going off. I mean, there's so much energy in these states, tremendous amount of energy. If you sort of start making room for it, you pay attention on a physical level, there's a lot of sensations that come along with our fears and anxiety. And by simply paying attention to it on a physical level, like I was safe, so I didn't have to worry about my safety, even though that fear was coming up. I knew on one level I was safe, well, as safe as you can be, put it that way. It gave me the opportunity to look at it on a physical way, because I was, in that mode of retreat and paying attention. But what it revealed to me was that it was a form of energy, and that was always changing. And that was the nature of it. It's always changing. And that was really helpful. It didn't lead to equanimity early on. It didn't really change it at all. But I noticed later when I left and sort of came back to my life, that somehow I was just quite a bit actually more equanimous and more able to just be with the emotion when it came up. And I thought that was interesting. And what I thought happened was that my mind was learning something about that. It wasn't revealing itself in that moment when I was dealing with that practice, but later it registered somewhere down there in my consciousness that this is a changing experience. This is not just who you are. This is an energy that's arising under certain conditions, expressing itself in not very pleasant ways, but it also changes. And that is a really good insight to have. And that comes out of sustained investigation, paying attention in a sustained way. And finally, the thing I want to say about noticing the impermanence of things, very, very helpful in working with anxiety and fear, is to see the impermanence of it. And one practice that I've encouraged and I've taken up myself is when I'm experiencing any kind of anxiety or fear, recognizing it, acknowledging it, trying to take a look at it, all of that, everything we've been talking about. But then, what can happen is, and I move on and I start reading or I start doing something else or whatever, and that anxiety is not there anymore. Be mindful of that fact. It's like being mindful of the gone or the passed away. In other words, we're aware of the arising, but we don't always acknowledge. Remember that recognition and acknowledgement piece? Not only is it helpful in recognizing the acknowledgement, the rising of it, the reaction to it, but recognizing and acknowledging when it's past. And believe it or not, that is extremely helpful, because the mind starts learning. The mind starts learning, wait a second, it's not here. When it's happening, it doesn't feel like it's impermanent. It's like I'm caught in it and I don't like it. But when you recognize that it went, where did it go? Well, it went because its nature is to rise and pass away. And so just acknowledging those times when it's not there, very helpful, because we tend to focus on those moments when it is. So I want to say part of the practice is to recognize when it's not there. And the mind starts learning something new, which is that it is this impermanent state. It's not me and mine. It comes up under certain conditions. It has its manifestation, but it's a process. And so it changes. That's its nature. It's not permanent. It's not you, not me. It's a conditioned state of mind. Okay. So I have a sneaking suspicion we wouldn't have any time for questions, but there's a question period to set tonight, so I thought we could take it up then. We're going to be, I know Reba's got a couple things to say before we go for dinner, but we're going into another mindful period, emphasis on mindful. It's a dinner break, so we can do the eating practice, and we want to, if we can maintain silence, and trying to, just be with ourselves and be through our ordinary activities. Maybe not turn on cable news, but just kind of take a bit of a break from that for another day. Plenty of time to catch up. That would be a good thing to do. Be a good use.